On day 1 in our terrestrial chamber, the nitrogen level was at 10 pounds per acre, the phosphorus level was about 200 pounds per acre, and the potassium was at less than 500 pounds per acre. In the aquatic chamber, the nitrogen was at 0.5 ppm and the phosphorus was at 0.1 ppm. The nitrogen level was pretty low, but the potassium and phosphorus levels were relatively high in the terrestrial chamber. In the terrestrial chamber, the temperature was 21.4 degrees Celsius and the pH was 7. The seeds have started to sprout. There's two roly-polies and nutrient-rich soil. In the decomposition chamber, we have 2 snails roaming around, and we have very few green leaves, and we have a lot of dry leaves. In the aquatic chamber, the temperature began at 20 degrees Celsius, the pH at 4.76, and the DO at 0.8. Originally, we had 2 fishes. One had passed away. Rest in peace, Nemo.
On day 2, the temperature dropped about 1 degree. The seeds continue to grow, but the roly-polies have disappeared in the dirt. In the decomp chamber, one of the snails has died and the green leaves still remain fresh looking. Snail number 2 is hiding. In the aquatic chamber, the pH increased 2 units and the salinity went up to 6 parts per million. The second fish has died and started decomposing, showing bacteria and growth in the water.
In the terrestrial chamber, the temperature dropped only slightly, which was about 1/10 of a degree, and the pH remained approximately at 7. Also, the sprouts continue to grow, the soil is healthy, and the roly-polies are submerged in dirt. In the decomposition chamber, the dry leaves aren't providing a lot of decomposition, and some of the green leaves have turned orangish and dead. In the aquatic chamber, the temperature and salinity stayed within the same unit as prior, but the dissolved oxygen increased to 2.3 mgl and the salinity went up to 7 parts per million. Also, the fish continued to decay and sink to the bottom.
In the terrestrial chamber on day 4, the temperature dropped slightly to the 1/10 of a degree and the pH remained at approximately 7. The peas have grown greatly and sprouted to the top of the container. In the decomp chamber, there were no significant changes, but most of the leaves are dead. In the aquatic chamber, the DO increased to 4.4 milligrams per liter and the salinity dropped down to 7 ppm. The water has gotten murkier, but the plants are still decaying.
In the terrestrial chamber, the pH and temperature relatively stayed the same, and the seeds have started to sprout to the top of the lid. The dry leaves in the decomposition chamber are starting to curl up, and there is water going through the decomposition to the terrestrial chamber. On day 5, the DO dramatically fell to 1.5 milligrams per liter, and the salinity increased 7 ppm once again. And the water is becoming murky, the plants are dying.
In the terrestrial chamber, the pH and the temperature remain approximately the same as before. There is heavy condensation on the sides, and the plant sprouts are gradually getting more abundant. In the decomposition chamber, there are no significant changes, and the leaves are dry and not providing any condensation. In the aquatic chamber, the DO jumped back to 6 and the salinity continued to fluctuate back to 63 parts per million. Both fish continued decomposing.
In the terrestrial chamber, the temperature has been dropping slightly and the pH has remained the same at 7. Also, condensation on the sides of the chamber has appeared and bean sprouts are growing. In the decomposition chamber, not much activity is happening and all the leaves are officially dead. In the aquatic chamber, the DO dropped down to 2.6 and the other measurements remain similar to before. Also, there has been no significant biotic changes.
In the terrestrial chamber, the pH once again was 7, but the temperature increased by 2 degrees Celsius. There was heavy condensation and less bean sprouts present than before and no grass sprouts. In the decomp chamber, there were no significant changes. In the aquatic chamber, the salinity went up 4 units, but the others stayed around the same measurements. The fish have dissolved and the water is more brown.
On the last day, the NP and NPK had either doubled or was cut in half. In the terrestrial chamber, the nitrogen went from 10 to 20, the phosphorus went from 200 to 100, and the potassium went from 300 to 170. In the aquatic chamber, the nitrogen went from 0.5 parts per million to less than 1 part per million, but the P had stayed the same.
Our greatest success would be in our terrestrial chamber because our plant thrived and lived well and was green throughout the whole project. Our failure would have been in our aquatic chamber because our fish died within 48 hours and our plants in the water had turned brown and started to decompose.